Wall. I was 3 weeks sleeping on Joe Clancy's floor with no sign of any improvement. Eating from tins and drinking from tins as well, with no chance of getting back inside my own front door until I cleaned up my act or apologised or begged or something. But I didn't know what, and Morley was on my case at work, calling for more all the time, raising the job count, giving me hell. Joe Clancy was fine about it. He was single anyway, and he was between women as well. He'd head off out at night, happy to be in a bar, and sometimes I'd tag along and he'd lose me after the first bar, or maybe the second, easing his body between two young things, his eyes on their breasts, his fingers in the curve of their backs, and I'd sit there drinking. Tipping 50 wasn't the best time to be breaking up and binging and losing my family and my home, and I suppose my wife too. "How's your count, Robbie?" Joe would ask, knowing that he was fine, covering well over the required number of cases a day, and even though I was the senior man, I was the one under pressure and struggling with the job. The biggest drawback was that I couldn't sign off on the work done. I'd missed the qualification when I should have got it, senior man but at the beck and call. I was billing all I could, and Morley was coining it for the bosses after leapfrogging over all of us. Everyone hungry for new accounts, business booming all the time, the paperwork piling up. Not so great. This was the best I could muster, knowing I was getting the heavy clients, knowing Morley was fixing it, clients with baggage and clients with history and money lost here and there. Some of them had memory loss too, which was only cured when the revenue got on their backs and some steel-rimmed woman seated herself like a north wind in their office and brought out paper they thought had gone down with the Titanic and dropped it on their desks. It slipped my mind became the mantra, and then I'd have to declare that my client could now recall with some clarity and would only be too happy to make a settlement, and Morley would purse his purple liverish lips and look at me. "Not good enough, Mr. King," written large across his flabby jowls. "Maybe I'll hand that over to Miss Crow," was his usual threat, and I'd look through his slanting blinds at Carrie Crow, or the Crow as she was referred to by Joe, all new and qualified and full of vim, perched at her corner desk. I'd say there was no need and scurry back to my cubbyhole and begin again. And then the annual office party came round, and I had to phone Kathy to beg for my good suit, and she said I could come round and collect it, but only when Desi was out at football, because if we had another row he'd get upset again, and he was doing badly enough at school as it was, and fighting on the bus, and I was a selfish bastard, and she knew it, and I knew it too. I stood in front of the wardrobe mirror and smoothed my tie. I could hear Kathy downstairs on the phone. She'd been on it when I arrived, and I knew it was her sister, and this was her protection if I misbehaved. I straightened the tie and checked the cufflinks, and had another sip from the nagging of powers, and slipped it back into my breast pocket, over my heart and out of sight. The party would be a ball breaker, with Morley mad to show us how he was blending the boss and big brother roles. He'd gazumped all of us, myself included, when old Wilson retired, and here he was, weaving a safety net around us, bringing us with him, even if we could all see right through him. He was fucking with our heads too, slipping new practices into place and new ways of doing things. Now he was running these early morning meetings, Carrie Crow all preen beside him, where your arse could get savaged even before you got to sit down, sip a cup of coffee and read the agenda. So I slipped the nagging back into my pocket and stood at the front bedroom window, resting my palms on the painted sill, and tried to work out the lay of the land, not as it looked now, but maybe 80 or 100 years before. My eye following the new road, how it cut through the meander of the old one. You could see the new housing estate springing up off it, but the old map of it was still there. The curves of briars and stone walls, even the cluster of old rooms outlining it on its way towards the shore. The Seasand Road, the locals called it, and I tried to follow where it stitched in and out, passing under the railway tracks and the big house in the woods, off in the distance and around by the older houses. And I could hear Kathy giving it 90 still on the phone, waiting to get me out of the house, waiting to get me out of her life. I'd been having a few and a few more over the previous 9 months or so, I suppose. Dealing with the shift, I call it. It's like there's a day comes when you just feel that the deck has moved, everything has gone up a gear, and you can feel the push, the extra expected of you. No one says it to you or knocks an anvil on your head or anything, but you feel it pulling you back, and there's an extra spring to everyone and a tightness to the whole team. You find yourself taking down books from the shelf that you haven't touched in years, and checking procedures and asking Joe Clancy for the most up-to-date tax law print-offs and reading them, just in case. Or you find Carrie Crow just looking at you like something that you'd find growing on old bread when you look up from your desk, or when you look up from your screen and your desk is all cluttered with paper and half-eaten sandwiches and everything is stray. I took the shortcut towards the bus stop around by old Tommy's house. It was boarded now since he died. The weeds silent in their movement, but reclaiming it all the same. Someone had cracked their first window, and the decay would accelerate now his daughter settled away, calling the odd weekend to check the locks. While I was waiting for the bus, Desi and two of his friends turned the corner on me before he saw me. He said something to the lads, shuffled over, and I asked him how he was. Fine. And he kicked the bus stop with his trainer, his football boots and dirty shirt in a plastic bag. How's the soccer going? I was trying here. Did you see Mum? His gaze was hard and I knew she'd been at it, and I fumbled for an answer. Did you give her the money? I had given her most of what was owed and said yes. All of it? He was getting big now, filling out, and still only 14. Almost, but that's between Mum and me. The other two laughed at something and he glanced in their direction. I didn't care much for the look of them, razored heads, cold eyes, but what could I say? Almost. Dad, you don't have a car now, only Mum has a licence and you're living in town too, and Mum has all the bills. That's between Mum and me. I knew I'd lost my licence. He moved closer. Dad? Then I saw him catch his breath, and mine too. You're still drinking, I can smell it. And I tried to take his arm. I wanted to slip him 20, but he pulled away and the bus swung in at the bus stop, and he joined his friends, all of them watching me as I fumbled for the change. So I was having a few, struggling in the back of a pub on Shop Street. I beg your pardon. So I was having a few, snuggled in the back of a pub on Shop Street, and knowing I had a dinner to go to and sit through and listen to the New Testament according to Morley. They'd be meeting up in Hartigan's for the backslapping, but I'd slipped that. I nodded a Guinness to the barman in case he was chatty, and now I was elbows up and happy. Halfway down the second pint, the cream glass smoothing everything. Even Kathy's face was easing away from me, how she'd looked when I'd slipped downstairs and left the envelope on the table. She could spot the flat of the magnet powers in my breast pocket, warming my heart, and she turned her back and said, "He's just leaving now, and he's drunk," into the phone. They were all well seated when I arrived, the room packed to the rafters with Christmas lights and rampant good cheer. I spotted our bunch in the far corner, the waiters fussing with the laminated menus, and despite myself, I had to sit one seat down from Morley. He put his hands on my shoulder, calling down the table to one of the lads, something about the wine, and he just left his hand there, like I could wait, and then he moved off without saying anything, calling to a waiter laden down with a tray of wine bottles. At least there was an empty chair between him and me. I'd chosen the lesser of two evils, easing in beside Tommy Mooney, who only ever talked about work. But he seemed to have visited Hartigan's and was smiling into space at something funny and twirling his wine glass airily. Morley came towards us, slapping fistfuls of bottles on the tables, four to a group, telling us to drink up, that there was more where that came from. He'll not have to tell me twice. Tommy Mooney leant in, filling my glass to the brim. Maybe things would be fine after all. You'd swear he was paying for it himself, the bollocks, Joe Clancy whispered on his way to the toilets. Whatever. We'll help him spend it. I drained my glass. Tommy Mooney was already ahead, smiling his big-toothed grin at me, the red stain of it, as we watched Morley working the tables, slapping backs, getting closer to the women, patting ass. He's some fucking idiot. Mooney was on a mission and well down his third glass when Carrie Crowe slipped into the vacant chair between Morley's and mine. "Mr. King, are you well?" Miss Crowe, were you delayed?" "No, I was in the ladies," and she slipped the napkin like a shroud across her thin knees. This was going to be even worse than I'd expected, so I clinked glasses with Tommy Mooney. May as well be pissed as miserable, and he winked back, or maybe his eyelid had started to droop. It was difficult to tell. Morley was back as the starters arrived. We'd all more or less decided beforehand, one of the secretaries spending an afternoon getting us to pick what we'd have to speed things up. This was Christmas after all. It was easier not to talk with the food arriving, and I showed a huge interest in everything Tommy Mooney had to say. We were lashing the wine too, while Carrie Crowe played with her plate, flicking at the green starter like she was picking glass from a wound. Morley made one or two attempts at conversation, but thankfully he was ambushed by some of the juniors, keen to hang on his every word, so I was well through the steak before he leant across Carrie and touched my arm. "How are you keeping, Robbie?" "I'm grand. How are you, Trevor?" And I held my glass towards Tommy, who began to hum and seemed to have difficulty focusing. Steady it, he mumbled, and he sloshed a little on my wrist as he poured. "Robbie." Morley again. He glanced quickly at Carrie, who was trashing something vegetarian into an even bigger looking mess, picking the large black beans from the wreckage and eating them. "What?" I was drawn between the question and Tommy Mooney, who was attempting to dye the sleeve of my good jacket a deep red. "What?" Morley hesitated. I could see he'd had a few. He glanced at Carrie again. "Robbie, you know we're a family. We care for each other. Deeply. I have broad shoulders." He tilted his glass a little, took a sip. "I'd like to lend you my shoulders, if there's anything we can do." "Do? About what?" Tommy Mooney was mopping the tablecloth now and patting my arm, sloshing more wine from my glass. Morley hesitated again. "If we can help in any way, maybe a little time off." He glanced at Carrie again. Or maybe counselling. The firm would gladly pay. We're a family after all. We do care. I could feel the room temperature falling. Counselling? For what? Fucking Mooney knocked my glass again with the bottle, attempting to replace what he'd spilled. Maybe it's not the time. Molly looked unsure and Carrie turned her full attention to him. Maybe not, Trevor. She went back to digging for beans. Trevor? Well, fuck me, there's the first. And I was on my feet. Someone shouted, "Speech!" and I could see Clancy laughing. "Go on, Robbie." He raised his pint. Morley had stood up too, his napkin in his outstretched hands. "Fuck you," I hissed. "Fuck you." Tommy Mooney was trying to mock my sleeve again and mumbling about waste, so I emptied my full glass into his lap and turned back to Morley. "You bollocks, you swing in here and get ahead of all of us, the big boss, and now you want to counsel us? Well, you know what you can do with your shoulders." I slapped down the napkin and stumbled across my chair. Tommy Mooney was dabbling at his crotch with his napkin and giggling, his eyes crinkled. "You tell him, Robbie. Good man." I had to get out, but my feet were tangled, so I grabbed the back of Carrie's chair. She shied away. "Don't worry, Crow. I wouldn't touch you with, and those beans will only give you wind. But with that bollocks there, you're probably well used to that already." And I straightened my collar as best I could and found the door. The taxi was quiet and my head was swimming. Shadow estates racing by, the driver giving up early on any chance of conversation. Counselling. I must have drifted off because the next thing I remembered was the driver shaking my arm and the low ticking of the engine. "We're here, sir, the bus stop." I focused on the new trees, Cooley's new house. "But I don't live here now." "This was the address you said, sir. It's €12. He was in his 30s and stocky, but I wasn't going to pay that, and I told him I'd get another taxi. I was living in town now, and he could whistle for the 12. I slipped from the car and started unsteadily down the shortcut. The driver slowed to get his door open. Fuck him. The blow sent me forward, the old wall of Tommy's garden looming, and I hit the pebble dash hard and head on, a flash of light and a hissing in my ears. I could feel his hands on me ripping through my pockets as he searched for my wallet. I struggled and he hit me again, a solid wooden crack, and then nothing. I could smell clay and the rusted tang of blood. My hands were sticky with it. It was still dark and my suit was stiff with dew, and I knew I'd pissed myself. The night was very still, with that silence which whispers how late it is, and the wine and the Guinness churned in my gut as I attempted to stand. I was going to be sick, and I tried to reach the wall as my stomach heaved. I met the wall again face first, the punch of it hitting me, the pain of it filling me with light as I smashed my head against it again, and then again.